Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name's John Farrell. I am the Exhibitions and Retail Coordinator at Street Level Photoworks, and I'll be hosting tonight's artist talk with Mhairi Law and Calum Angus MacKay. So I'm just going to ask Calum and Mhairi to come online, say hello to everyone. You guys with us?
Yep.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello there. Hiya.
How's it going? Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for your patience while I was scrambling around behind the scenes there to get everything working okay. So tonight, as I say, we're joined with Calum Angus MacKay and Mhairi Law. And the reason that we are coming to you live tonight is to celebrate and hear a little bit more about their respective projects that are on show as part of Lewis Elegies, which is on at the Beacon Arts Centre in Greenock. And that exhibition is on until the 9th of October, and it's open to the public on Fridays and Saturdays only. So if you are planning on going along, do make sure to double check the website. The exhibition's open on Fridays and Saturdays only until the 9th of October. So it's a real pleasure for me to be joined with you guys tonight. And hear a little bit more about your work. I must say, when we were putting together the programme for Everything Flows, I was really excited that we were going to be revisiting this work. We did a small exhibition of this work as part of the Gaelic Mod a couple of years ago, so it was really exciting and fortuitous that we could bring that work back out. So I'm not going to say too much more. I'll kind of let you guys give a little bit of info on yourselves. As I should say, you're both coming to us live from the Isle of Lewis tonight, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's correct,
Yep.
You are, and you are somewhat kind of neighbours, aren't you? You're really close by.
We are.
Under normal circumstances. So yeah, I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that as the talks progress. But so first of all, I think we're going to hear from Mhairi, and you're going to give us a little kind of insight into your practice and some of the projects you've been involved in. Is that right?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so firstly I'm going to talk a bit about my work in the show with Calum Angus, and then a bit of context to my island-based journey and my photographic relationship with the Isle of Lewis, which has been highly influential on my practice. So the work at the Beacon that's currently on is my project called The Darkest Dawn, which was commissioned by Atlanta Arts Centre initially in 2018 as part of the centenary events commemorating the Iolaire disaster of 1919. And for those of you who don't know the story of the Iolaire, it was a ship returning soldiers home to the island after serving in World War I. And it was about 1 o'clock on New Year's morning, and the Iolaire sunk right at the mouth of Stornoway Harbour after hitting the rocks known as the Beasts of Home. Over 200 men died right in sight of home, which meant that practically a whole generation of island men were killed. And the effects of this are still felt to this day. And I think that the fact that it took 100 years to begin commemorating it and talking about it properly shows the scale of the impact that it had on the island and the generation since then. And it's just tragic to think of what those men could have done and what their children might have achieved and what the island would have been like today had it happened. So there were some beautiful events and artworks that commemorated this back in 2019. And I shared this exhibition initially with Glasgow-based artist, stained glass worker Alec Galloway, who makes beautiful work. And it was definitely I felt like a big take on this project, especially living here and with such an emotional subject that still very much touches the people from here. So with my series of images, I took long exposure shots of the monument that was the first monument to commemorate the Iolaire on the Beasts of Home, right where the ship struck the rocks. So the next 5 images are the images, John, if you just want to go through them. Thanks. So it's practically a black image, that one, but because I first off wanted to attempt to represent blackness and the literal darkness that those men must have experienced, which is a totally hard thing to imagine, really, because we're so used to light, and unless we choose to, which is rare, we never usually find ourselves in complete darkness with no other option to light. So it was one thing that I really wanted to get across, was that blackness and that experience. And the next thing I wanted to capture was the dim coming of dawn beginning to creep in, because as harrowing as those moments for the men on the ship must have been, the accounts that I've read of that dawn arriving and their families discovering the tragedy are unimaginable. And I wanted to represent the sun rising on a very different island from the one that it left. So that was the Iolaire project. And like I say, definitely one that was, it was a bit different from actually the work that I'd done previously at the time. It was a lot more conceptual, I think, and in response to something like that, that was a first for me, and it was a real privilege to take on. But the next slide be on that, John, would be going right back to, I think it's slide 7. Going right back to one of my first projects that I began on Lewis, and which is my degree show project right back in 2014.
So just so that the audience at home can see, I'll just slowly go through these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is jumping right back now to some of the first works that I really started taking a bit more seriously on the island, I think, because I'd been coming up since I was a young teenager with my family and always taking photographs, but this was my university work back in 2014. And for this, I focused on a young group of people on the island who chose to make Lewis their home, and whether they were from there or had moved there from elsewhere, or in my opinion, most importantly, were from there, had been away and then chosen to come back. These are the people that I wanted to photograph because, like I say, it was a place I'd always visited, and I knew these guys absolutely loved the island, had ambitions there, thought it was their playground, absolutely loved it. And that completely contradicted the reputation that I always heard about the island, was that young people leave and there's nothing for them. They leave and they don't come back. And I wanted to give these people a voice to show that there are young folk who love it, and it defies that stereotype. And as essential as it is to move away from wherever you're from and get more experiences, I think it's really important to know that there's that choice there. And this work was after my degree show, kindly chosen by Malcolm to be exhibited at the Future Proof 2014 exhibition, which I think in the next image shows the street level shot there, which was 2014. And that really kicked off a lot of work that I focused on here, actually, because the continuation of this, I began to look more, I really enjoyed the landscape work. And because this was my uni work, I wasn't totally whoever is, but I wasn't totally I didn't know, I hadn't found my voice yet. I hadn't really focused on what it was that I wanted to do. And from this, I really honed in on landscapes and Lewis landscapes specifically, because after this, I started looking just at the landscape, but also the stories that could be told through the landscape of the people and the culture. And I kind of saw them as land portraits, and I love how the landscape and the history of the people is so surface here. So you can read it like a timeline, you can see in the literal lines and the scars of the landscape that tells a story. If you go to the next slide, John, please. So these were part of my project Iolaire Island, which was a multimedia exhibition that I did with my mum, Pat Law, back in 2015. At Anlanta Arts Centre in Stornoway. And it was these 3 images that subsequently went on to the Jill Todd Award later that year, and that's in the next slide, John. And that was part of my land portraits, as I called them. And after that, so that was 2015, and it took a couple of years after that I moved up to Lewis, and my work definitely took a bit of a tangent on that. But when I opened up a business and started doing things with that, but I'll come back to that later. But I think I'd like to talk next about a more recent project that I've done here, which documented the restoration and repairs of a traditional fishing boat. Yeah, that's this one. So Ansular, which is the boat, which means the gannet in Gaelic, and was built in 1994 by boat builders John Murdo and Angus Smith. And her design was based on the traditional Scots fishing boat design that came from Ness, which is the very northwest tip of the Isle of Lewis. And there's lovely details and features that define her design of the time, which was developed to work further offshore in rough seas. She's an open boat. She's relatively light for her size, which meant that the crew could drag her up the beach by hand or on rollers. The gaffs are all of a certain size and rigs that could be lowered and stored in the boat. and the yard, which holds the top of the sail, is longer than the mast, which means that the sail area is relatively low. And that means that there's not so much lean on the boat, and it's good in rough seas. And when you're trying to work, that's pretty important because she's a fishing boat. So yeah, the next few slides are of this. So maybe just go through them slowly, John, please. But because she's a wooden boat, she's in fairly consistent need of maintenance and repairs. And Pavement is the charity who look after these 3 traditional fishing boats. Iolaire is the biggest one of the 3, but this is the particular one that was getting repairs at the time. And it's a lot of effort from the volunteers of this charity to keep her in commission. And she's a pretty special piece of maritime heritage, and they give her a lot of their time. So partly I was documenting this community effort from them, and Mark Stockel, who's an Ullapool-based boat builder, and the main repairs he was doing on the boat at the time. And when I first started visiting the island as a teenager, I sailed on the boat quite a bit. So it was lovely to sort of make that connection with the boat again in a totally different and new way. But it was lovely to see. And the pictures from this project are actually on show at the museum in Ness on the Isle of Lewis till 24th of September, where there's also a little book. And I'm going to shamelessly plug this because all proceeds are going to Pavement, which is the charity who look after the upkeep of the boat. So get in touch if you would like one. And it's got all of the pictures in it and a lovely little intro from island-based writer Ian Stephen and Mark Stockel, the boat builder. So yes, worth a look if you're into traditional boats, for sure. So there's a couple of other recent island-based projects that I've been working on that I think I'll briefly speak about because they're still in process and need I think just a little bit more space for that. But the first looks at the sea cliffs on the west side of Lewis. And in taking these, I was thinking a lot about deep time and supposed edge places, and also at the sea as a joining point as well as a separation. So looking at that, at the sea roads and the connections between one side of the Atlantic and the other, and ideas around that. So it's still, like I say, a work in progress. But the next 3 slides show my most recent stuff, which over the summer I've been documenting peat cutting, which I'd been wanting to do for years and finally managed to get around to it this year. And because we cut peats ourselves every year. So I love the process, the tools and the landscapes they're in, and the people who cut them. They're just like, it's a photogenic process, that's for sure. And it's just one of the beautiful traditional things that are still very much done here. Obviously not as many people as there used to be, but it's still done. And it will definitely take me years because I think it deserves the time and the depth of work to properly document it, because the peat stacks are a work of art in themselves, so deserve that. But yeah, so that's beginning, and we'll definitely take some time on that. So I think that was just a kind of a brief overview of my very specific island-based projects so far. And I hope it kind of gives an idea of the rich influence that Lewis has had on my photography. And it all definitely starts with the island. Like if I was a writer, I'd write about it, but these are the tools that, that are available to me, I think. But like I said earlier, when I first moved up, I started a little business where I have my darkroom and a little gallery attached to that. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because it's very much what I do here as well, even if I feel like the work is a little bit separate, but not, I think. Yeah, so this is some of the work that I choose to sort of show through the darkroom. And it's often just like single images, quite non-project specific work. And I haven't showed it in this slide here, but there's a lot of textiles and cyanotype textiles and stuff that I do with that. So it's definitely more like experimental one-off things that I do with that. But also more recently, I've been exhibiting other photographers' work, which is definitely something I want to do more of, because it's a small space, but it's a lovely little workshop space that I'd really love to continue showing work in. So most recently, yeah, Danielle MacLeod, she's a Lewis photographer, and she graduated from Glasgow School of Art at the end of last year. And in that anticlimactic lockdown graduation, she came back to Lewis and took on the menteeship through the Atlanta support scheme, and I was her mentor over the winter. And this work that she's made here is a cumulation of that menteeship, and I think she's absolutely brilliant. It's wonderful. So it's really lovely to see a young island artist who's exploring their own territory in that way as well. This was definitely a sort of reconnection for her to the island, and yeah, I'm totally going to just see what she does. She's fantastic. So the next couple of slides are her as well, I think, John. A little bit of space there as well. And at the moment, what opened last weekend is Earth by Ella, which is by Ruby Pleur. And she's a London-based artist. And this is part of Flow Photo Fest, which is a total privilege for me, I feel, in my little space to be showing work through. So very, very happy to have that here and part of the festival. So that's what's been going with Island Darkroom at the moment. So I feel like I've kind of covered my island-based practice and would be definitely up for any questions afterwards or whatever. But I think that's all I wanted to say on that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mhairi. And apologies, I'm still having a little bit of connectivity issues.
No
hopefully. So yeah, but that was a fantastic presentation and a real whirlwind tour of your practice. And it's great to see not only, you know, setting up home and setting a business back in Iolaire Lewis, but also creating opportunities for other artists as well. I think that's really, really fantastic and to be greatly applauded. And as far as shameless plugs go, we're all for shameless plugs of artists working. I must say, we were lucky enough to get some of your cyanotype cards in over the last couple of years that have been really popular in the gallery. So definitely around Christmas and stuff, they've always flying off the shelf. So definitely, if you can, I'll share the link to the Island Darkroom later on in the chat. You should definitely check it out. And if you do you allow visitors? Can people come and visit you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, open for business. That's for sure. Yeah.
Brilliant. Great. Fantastic. Okay. Well, now we're going to hear a little bit from Calum Angus MacKay. Hopefully the little gremlins that are living in my computer and slowing everything down will be at bay. But apologies in advance, everyone. That's such as the hazards of live streaming in the world of COVID. But let's see how we do. So I'll just bring that up for you just now. There we go. Can you see that okay, Calum?
Can do, yes.
Fantastic. Take it away.
I must first of all congratulate Mhairi on a bit, like you said, John, a very fine presentation. And I think earlier on we alluded to the fact that we are geographically quite close. Not tonight, I'm in my office in Stornoway. I live in the town, but by coincidence, the village that myself and Mhairi belong to is called Achmore, which in Gaelic means big field. In English means big field. And coincidentally, Mhairi and her partner Ines, they decided to pitch up next door to my croft on the big field. So we are actually crofting and creative neighbours when I'm not tied up with too much of my other life. But obviously we do cross over, a lot of creative crossover. And as Mhairi said, there's an awful lot of young kind of healthy talent coming through in the creative practice and the Hebrides as well, which for both of us is great to see. For me, especially because lo and behold, I've been at it a little bit longer. And for this particular show, going back to the time of the Gaelic Mod in Glasgow, I could never ever forget without crediting Street Level going back some 30 years. The image you're seeing to my left there, the portrait with catfish, obviously a little bit of Captain Nemo humor flying through it. But this is going back 30 years. At that particular point, Street Level were incredibly supportive of me, as was the Department of Fine Art Photography in Glasgow School of Art, which in a strange way has never actually left my core. We still have a very healthy kind of community of artists that went through that particular department at the time, and for reasons, I guess, for reasons of personality, of storytelling, and of kind of lifelong connection, remain very strong. So basically, I put out a great kind of debt of thanks to Street Level and to the art school, because through Street Level Gallery at the time, I was incredibly lucky, and for a 5-year period from, well, whenever it was, but obviously it would have been quite some time ago, for a 5-year period, probably from the age of 25 to 30, I was lucky enough to be a full-time professional photographic artist, which, coming from a small kind of crofting village based in soil and animals in the Hebrides, was a phenomenal leap. But at the same time, I was able to use these groundings of storytelling and people within what I did. And like I say, I was incredibly lucky. What was strange about the beginnings of this particular show with Street Level Photoworks a couple of years ago is when they actually came to me asking if I had anything old. Because as an artist, you're very often used to people coming to you and asking for something new. But that was a very healthy kind of reflection where you had to kind of edit down, almost edit down a body of work that has lived with you for that long period of time, and also address things to a new audience. And that's I guess that's the beauty of the work that Mhairi was talking about earlier, and the work that I'm doing as well. You forget that some people are maybe only seeing this for the first time, although the fact that it is 30 years old. This was Portrait with Catfish. I chose this one probably at the time as a kind of flyer for the exhibition that was called By Fin, By Wing, By Hoof. It was basically the beginnings of a studio practice, using the barn as studio and looking at the things that naturally were around you. So this catfish, my uncle was then a fisherman. He was with, I think it was the boat was a Fiery Cross. He would come in with them with the strangest of things. My mother would actually take this as a kind of product for our tea. And then the leftovers, you kind of think to yourself, hang on a second, this is worth experimenting with. So that was Young Man Portrait with Catfish. So what I quite liked about it is that it was the beginnings of working with a material and working with characters and people who were very dear to you and around you. So I guess the reason for taking that into this slideshow is to introduce that kind of rather emotive and rather kind of sensitive working practice. So I can move on to the next slide, John. Yeah, this particular image, this fits into the same era, it fits into the same working practice, where the barn, which was the animal housing, which was the kind of feeding stuff, that then became my studio. So the neighbors are coming in. This was my old neighbor, Iolaire, and I began using my neighbors as subject matter. So I love the poetry of this piece. It's called Gorsfield, and it takes my old neighbor in. He maybe doesn't realize that the actual story, the image, is about him. He would walk down the road a couple of times a day, passing this old gnarled gorse bush. When the gorse bush was past its best, I then took him in to make the portrait. He maybe wouldn't be aware of, you know, the beauty of himself in this particular instance. And again, it was a long exposure with a head turn of 15 seconds. And so it went from beginning to end. And I'm incredibly fond of this picture. Again, it's a fairly kind of average scan, but the actual the content itself, it was one of these turning points where you realize that you were making images, that you were making statements about your neighbors, about those around you, that had never been done before. Or because I guess in the Hebrides, the tradition of making pictures, the tradition of offering stories about the people, the villages, the language, the culture, they were always very kind of surface-based, whereas I was actually coming from within. I guess that was where I had a different kind of, certainly a different introduction to the people, because I knew them all. And it was amazing that they actually put their trust in me. It was a real leap of faith for family members, for old neighbors, for other people to become studio models. It was a real leap of faith for them in me. And that I've always kind of held that very dearly. So the next image, and again, this is probably when I was, like I say, in my early 20s. This image is along the similar lines. This is called Mother and Salt Meat Pavement. And again, it goes back to the food stuff and the production and the product of the land. This is basically, these are lumps of salted meat that would hang by the stove all winter. And you can have them there and do nothing with them, but asking your mother to go barefoot over them is a slightly different kind of proposition. But she trusted what I was doing. She trusted the motivation behind the pictures I was making. Didn't understand them, didn't want to possibly at the time. But again, it was that really experimental phase, which I look back on, and I can see that. I almost see it as I made it yesterday. And you know, it's to me, it's still very, very powerful. And I'm probably the three that have been. I kind of hark back to the fact that they worked really well at the time, and I wasn't even aware of it myself. Just how close I got to people's kind of inner existence, if you like, and these elements that are incredibly physical. So we can move on to the next one. Again, as you're setting that up, John, again, not forgetting that all the conversations, all the setting up, all the kind of management, if you like, of these images, it was all done in Gaelic as well. Again, that's the kind of, it's a bit of kind of a winter wasteland where with the last kind of gnarled heads of cabbages sitting on a field. And then this one is kind of key to that process, to that exhibition process as well, because it begins the process of actually building images. So you're creating containers, you're creating freezing processes, you're creating many different layers of that are very, very natural to the Hebridean existence. And you're just presenting, photographing and delivering them in a very different way. And I enjoy the simplicity of this one, and probably feeds very well into one of the better known pictures, which is the next one coming up, John, if you're able, slide 5. This is Lead Lamb. This was done, believe it or not, even before Damien Hirst was playing with calves and formaldehyde. This again with the building process, where I was then going from smaller units. This then became a little bit more industrial. So this kind of complete animal carcass is set in an industrial freezer, and then riveted with lead and with sheet lead. And so the actual, I guess you're taking something that's a very common aspect of crofting life, of Hebridean life, of Scottish life, and you're transforming it into something that's far more iconic and far more kind of powerful. And again, I was beginning to enjoy the whole building process, and from beginning to end. And on to swine, on to the next one. Yeah, and this one here, this is one I actually made out in Aberdeenshire, and I enjoyed the mass production of the animals, the mass production and the movement of the natural movement of these animals when they're all kind of herding together. And this was part of a much, I guess all the images are part of a much wider series. So this was just an example of how I suppose with each step of each exhibition, I was quite lucky in that when I did a show, a new gallery, a new agent might ask for something additional. So I guess as most artists are aware, thankfully I was quite prolific as a young artist, so making additionals, making other work was not a problem to me. So swine, that probably was part of a 6-part series done in Aberdeenshire. And we'll move on to the next one. And this one here is quite, I'm not saying it's unique for me because it's far more kind of classically pictorial, but as Mhairi knows as well, I belong to an area called Lochs. It's a Lochs area of Lewis. It's set in the bog, it's set in the boggy wasteland. And this was done, so I'm actually standing in the loch with a set of waders on, and my youngest daughter, she was by the bank. I was shouting out the exposure times. So this is done obviously around about August, September time of year, and it's just it's one of these images which I make little excuse for, that I can just kind of at will I'm able to drift maybe away from the more kind of brutal side of agriculture and just enjoy the beauty of the place as well. So it's done with a pinhole, a kind of zero range pinhole camera, and it's a tool which I maybe take out maybe twice a year. But then if you get the results you want, they're beautiful poetic pieces. On to the next one. And the next one is moving from beautiful poetic pieces. We moved down to when I was working in Cardiff. I did a scholarship in '92 to Derry in Northern Ireland, and then I did another scholarship to the Photo Gallery in Cardiff, along with the Portfolio Gallery based in Edinburgh. So again, it's the continuation of the constructed image, and this is entirely constructed, obviously, but the background as well. So if you imagine a studio where you have a table, a sand-filled table for the bitumen setting, for the tar that's used to set the road, you have smashed windscreens, and you have an unfortunate nag who broke her leg in Bristol. So it's the combination of these elements, and it's this one, in terms of its title, it was just called Horse, Tar and Laminate, and it was again going back to the riveted lamb, going back to these kind of very natural, very kind of rural elements, and trying to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct them in a very different fashion. And this was part of the Isolate series, again probably from 1993, and this is a second image from the same series. Again, most things I'm showing you here are in a kind of sketch form, if you like. It's more like looking at a sketchbook. They're not all finished pieces. So that's the kind of process it goes through. So you're marrying up materials that would not normally belong together. You're marrying up materials that might exist in a much wider landscape, but you're creating your own kind of almost micro landscape. And this from a studio. I was then based in the Chapter Arts Centre down in Canton, in Cardiff, and had a very enjoyable, a very productive period. Again, maybe the Celtic, maybe the Gaelic crossover from myself to the Welsh, to the language, to the landscape. It was a fairly natural progression. Okay, next one, John. And then we then end up quite a number of years later. I guess many people ask me, you've had a sense of what I did in terms of a photographic artist, in terms of structuring and constructing images right throughout the UK. And this then comes back to trying to exist, as we all know, as Mhairi knows, as anybody knows in the art world. You have to almost have another element of stability in your life. Mine is still media in many respects today. I'm a kind of hobby photographer because just the amount of effort, the amount of time, the amount of hours that I put into media. But this is an example of how media and photography can coexist and can feed each other quite well. This was probably going back maybe 15 years. I'd taken maybe a 6-month period out of television, and I started photographing a group of people who are sea shepherds. They're not eco warriors in that sense of sea shepherd. They look after small uninhabited islands and take the stock off them. And this was then, as I was photographing them, as I was spending time with them, I then thought, there's a film here, there's a documentary here, which there was. And then I was able, if you like, to get my pictures made, and also to make a document, to make a film on their lives. And there's a couple more from the same series. You can move on, John, sorry. That's from the same, that was made out in the Shant Islands, just between that. And this one here, that was a film I made probably about 12 years ago on the last blacksmith. Again, I was able to work with this craftsman, look at his work, look at his enthusiasm for what he was actually making. So I made a short film of him, and there was a remastering, a reversioning made just a couple of years ago for the BBC Alabit channel as well. So on to the next one, John, sorry. This one here, Mhairi was talking earlier about peat. This is a documentary I'd made on ammonia. Ammonia is the Gaelic for peat. And this was basically an experiment. I was going around Scotland, meeting people, meeting cutters, craft workers, etc. And at the same time, I was charged by the director with creating a piece of art. So this canvas, it basically lay in the peat bank above the village. It lay there for 3 weeks, probably longer, with all the natural bitumen, with all the natural oils, with all the natural colours running through it. and then I took it back to the studio just for a bit of refinement. That's the way it is. That's the way ammonia is. But again, it's a local process transformed into something far more contemporary and far more kind of abstract. And the next couple of images, I'm wary of the time, so I'll try not to keep you much longer. This was from the Bialoch, the Creative Places. I was awarded one of the Creative Places awards, again, probably about 5-6 years ago. And again, it's the local tradition of hanging out these huge, big sheets of these domestic sheets when it's a wedding, a birthday, a celebration, these kind of things. So this was Tractor John was this boy getting married. I was taking these statements, I was taking these kind of markers of time, and I was photographing him in completely different locations, under bridges, etc. This one is actually on a trig point out in the moor. And then I can move on to the next image. And the next image is the assembly of all these. So this probably, I don't know, it's about 20-30 feet tall and very, very long. So you're seeing all these happy 25th Clare, happy 75th Mhairi. So these are roadside banners that I've created into this huge, big kind of public art piece just by the roadside in this old RAF station. So that was there for about a week. And then that was a very enjoyable process. And I made a short film out of this as well in the making of the banners. And the next one, again with television, we very often have the luxury of working with photographers who have been here, or maybe over the last 30-40 years. This was a Swedish photographer who came, Gösta Sandberg, who was here in the 70s, and he came to me and asked if I might be interested. He came to a local researcher, and then she came to me asking if I'd be interested in following Gösta Sandberg around the islands. And I said, well, we'll meet him and we'll see. So lovely fellow. And then we met some of his contributors back then. I'll pass you on. I'll move on to next one. And so I was re-photographing some of these. And this one here, Donald Mackay down in South Uist. And he came out and he says to me, I'm barefoot. And I said, well, that's the way I want you. And it's just, there's something about the kind of the comfort of being barefoot in his own craft that I just loved. And this 40-year gap between Gösta Sandberg and myself, just doing some very kind of, I suppose on the face of it, it's simple photojournalism, but that's something that's always incredibly valuable within these communities as well. And I'll move on to the next one. And this is one I did over in Ireland. As I travel, I sometimes just try and pick up the odd picture here and there. This was, I think it's going down to the shore of Sorrows in Donegal in the west of Ireland. And this man he felt like someone from home. He talked like someone from home, and we just got on really well. And I just took his picture. So it was again, I do in the photojournalism. There's always a wee twist of humor that I can enjoy as well, and maybe the final still will give you that. This was the very first day of lockdown. The very first day of the lockdown last year. I went round Stornoway with my camera, just with my big camera, and just took some portraits. And this was just the hairdressers and the facial waxing they went over. So and that sort of gives a pretty good kind of 30-year taster, if you like, of my practice. And I think there's a final short 2-minute clip of a recent film I made for BBC Iolaire based on the Charles Rennie Mackintosh story, if you like, in a limited sense, but also the fires through the eyes of students who'd attended Glasgow School of Art.
Schon i hyd turus, ham I credyn ddiaf, som fa mi feddachyn nach romi carantnionach na fancy. Ich va dúne ystay an the college din jalain, a va colch ddwmsw.
Vi sin kunjach ek na steps, says vegan ocean va neda vasin foundation year vi kormak in je vil dotche mechels, vi sin dol stachin eken na studios far road de pente.
Sin dai vater go I the ocean hokalach. Anam clue agus rutagag Charles Rennie Mackintosh ek my jag was agus ek na Holland.
Han I kutchigin stay agus hota. The marks on fire. Agus va giroch gal as y neu agus rodynne smynioch de hwta, fel sy'n ffyr.
There was a kind of gathering of, old friends and colleagues. And it was a very, very, very emotional experience because people were crying. I was myself.
Bha fúil cael orange. Bha fechking and sparks. Agus chaishing amach san Uber agus reaching suasgoon skull galling.
You could hear the scaffolding, everything crackling, kind of pops and bangs. But the moment you arrived here in 2018, that night when I got here, I thought, this is really, this is going to leave nothing.
Nach ra liwgar lwsgach, na chawl môr gylior. O'r chabe yn tourism ieddig. Sa glwyn is cwnig a geiddi as oergyn. Fo hio hiw gw, cholisht jalen glasachol. Nach madam.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Calum. That was, a fantastic presentation, but also an incredibly moving piece of footage there. Some people before I joined Street Level, I actually worked as a tour guide in the Macintosh building, so I got to know the building really well. So it was kind of heartbreaking to see the library and different things again. But Mhairi, would you like to join us on screen and we can have a little chat with the audience? That was two wonderful presentations, and it's really interesting seeing two practices rooted in the places that you're from, but coming from completely different approaches. And it's also interesting, in the politest way, Calum, having an artist of an older generation paired with a younger artist dealing with similar themes, but as I say, in totally contrasting ways. It was fantastic, and I'm sure the audience at home would have gotten a lot out of that. We've got a comment from Calum who said, exhibiting through a portfolio, which is much missed in Edinburgh, photo gallery and in Derry. Was it unusual to stop working in the gallery setting and work more in media or TV, or was that a natural progression for you?
It was a natural progression, but I'm sure for any young artist there are times in their practical lives when art or the production of art or the sales of art or the actual supporting of the artist, it doesn't satisfy everything. So a bit like Mhairi, where Mhairi has the kind of studio, she has her kind of textiles and other products. I had to find a way of surviving, and luckily I had been involved in Gaelic radio from when I was a student. So in being involved in telling people stories and being involved in, I suppose, going right throughout Scotland or initially, and using these skills, it wasn't that difficult, and I was able to kind of dip in and out of the photographic practice from time to time.
It was interesting. I was thinking kind of both in terms of your projects. You were talking about the Island Darkroom and that as a place for a community of artists to kind of come and participate and show work, or just even for yourself, just to get work out into the world. And even, what you were saying about the Iolaire, a whole generation practically of men lost. And Calum, the kind of narrative and the characters, all the work seems to be really rooted in community. And I was wondering, do you think coming from somewhere like Lewis, that role of community just for everyday life, is that more important? Is that what kind of brings this to your forefront? Because it seems to be a thing, as someone who's grown up kind of in sort of suburban Glasgow, I really don't have that same feeling of kind of community and the importance of it. I just wondered if you maybe had if there was maybe some parallels to draw there.
Well, I'm from the borders though, is the only thing. So, I've just been visiting here for a long time, and that's how I got to know people here, and like just totally fell in love with it. But where I'm from as well, there was definitely a community, and it was a wee village south of Edinburgh, but it was there was definitely like a strong community there that I'm still like, it's one of the reasons that I do love living here. So you're totally right. There is like that, especially over lockdown. I mean, like, it's still a very new thing, Island Darkroom. So like, especially over lockdown, that like craving for community was very real, and neighbors, and just realizing the importance of that. And you know, it's definitely rooted it all in that. But I'm quite pleased that you think I'm from here. It means I'm doing something right. That's
I like that one.
Yeah.
And Calum, for yourself, like, was it a tough ask to get your neighbours and family to participate in the way that they did? Because it's quite a performative set of pictures that you shared with us from that early show.
Yeah. Again, I guess when it's in the moment, you're just doing it. You're maybe not, and you're not over-analyzing, because if you over-analyze at that time as a younger experimental artist, if you over-analyze and over-question and protect yourself, you're not going to get anywhere. So, you felt it was right, or I'm not even sure you were entirely convinced. I was entirely convinced about it. Taking the picture, for instance, you know, the guy where the gorse bush, he's just resting his neck on the gorse bush, and I'm studying his skin, his vest, his demeanor, his whole kind of physique, and trying to get it just right in the camera. I'm not even sure if I got the real power of it until I saw the negative, until I saw the print itself. That's the beauty of the black and white analog image. But yes, I suppose when you take that to another level, I only put in a few of them, but there'd be other neighbours I'd have them kind of, you know, suspended from kind of I'd have their arms suspended from ropes. I'd have things just and they were all keen to do it. And it's so strange because, you know, culturally, in terms of, and generationally, I was very much at the end of something, and I know exactly what Mhairi's referring to. But you know, when we were brought up with no television, incredibly Presbyterian kind of baseline existence. Our existence was primarily until the age of, you know, until you went to school, you were in Gaelic. So it was a very, very, very different set of values, if you like. And I guess I had to, as anybody would say, you have to kind of go away to learn a little bit and then come home and realize that you do that, the tail end of what you're seeing is incredibly valuable. And if it's valuable to you, if that small story of the Gorsfield, if that small story of a piece of fish, if that small story of a piece of ice, if these stories mean something in that small croft, in that small village, then they have a far more global reach as well. Because I think no matter what kind of, you know, rural community you belong to, you should be able to see or recognize these same elements, you know.
How was it, if I can ask, all that work, how was it received by the community when it was work? Did you show it here at all? Was that an opportunity at the time, or did the people who were in the images, did they see them?
Yeah, it was a most bizarre. It was a most bizarre thing, because I think I first of all showed some of that stuff in maybe even the earlier street level stuff was softer, was a little more abstract. I think probably when I was lucky enough to get a one-person show in London, in the Photographers Gallery in London, maybe just after the Portfolio Gallery in Edinburgh, and I think that's when I was able to kind of focus on that stuff being far more. It wasn't just sketches, it wasn't just notions on paper. It had to be real and had to be done. And yes, maybe a year after that, it did come to the local gallery here, the Launter Gallery here, and it was quite strange. Yeah, because you know, even the subject matter, they didn't care about galleries. They didn't care about photography. To them, photography was something that maybe happened twice a year with somebody from the mainland coming with a small Instamatic camera. So they would just be in family portraits. So some of the people, I mean, I didn't start off in photography. I started off thinking I wanted to be a painter. It maybe took me a wee while to figure out that I wasn't a very good one. But you could still take the same kind of narrative hooks. You could still take the same kind of cultural references and try and put that into black and white photography. And I think that's where the Glasgow Art School, I think when they saw that little opportunity, when they saw that little kind of chink of possibility, and at that age, in your early 20s, if somebody gives you that little chance and says, okay, see what you can do with this.
Given that permission to
give the permission, and then the payback has to be that you push yourself a little further. And if me pushing myself a little further was using those familiar to me in most situations, and making some, trying to keep kind of, credible art. It wasn't tokenism. It was trying to be credible. It was trying to be very much relating to the people who were in it. So when you ask your mother to, thankfully she's still living, but when you ask your mother to kind of crawl over and walk over barefoot over some salt meat that's been hanging on the stove for the last 3 months, and they don't question it, they just say, okay, and that to me, even at the age of now in my mid-50s, I'm still thinking, crikey. I look back and sometimes I look at it and think, crikey, somebody else made these, but then they didn't, because it was real. It was very real.
I mean, it's an interesting parallel, actually, talking about the salt image. But Mhairi, you mentioned in your presentation, collaborating with your mum on projects and making work together. So it's not quite the same as walking over salted meat, but yeah.
Not yet. I mean, I could ask her yet, but yeah.
There was a couple of questions that came in, a couple of comments as well. Again, kind of talking about communities of people and the importance of the art school to you, Calum.
Yes.
Harry Kerr, someone who I think you know quite well, he just commented saying, excellent stuff, impressive work, greetings from Donegal. And so Harry's involved, along with Martha McCulloch, at ArtLink in Fort Dunree, who we've done a few projects with, so keep an eye on our website for some news coming about, some other things coming up in the future. There's also a comment from Paul Glazier, who's also exhibiting as part of the Everything Flows series of events. So he says, great presentations, thanks to you both. And Paul's work is currently on show at the Rockfield Centre in Oban, and that's a long-term study that he's made of the island of Battersea and its inhabitants. Like a 30-year relationship with that community of people. It's again, really worth seeing if you can. We've got a question for you, Mhairi, from Christina Weber. She asks, how have you found the appetite for a darkroom in Lewis, especially considering the huge prominence of digital photography and printing today? Has this been a challenge, or are most people still shooting film? I'm curious about the appetite for the processes of making photography.
Well, it's one of those things that is still, because it's quite a wee darkroom as well. It's definitely not it's not a public darkroom as such, like the little darkroom space itself. So I don't really advertise that as a space to rent. But when people ask, I do love to let them use it. And surprisingly, there has been a lot of people who have asked to use it. But even then, out with that, that's just maybe tourists or people who I know on the island who do know how to shoot and print darkroom photography and want to use it. But then there's other artists here who I know have their own darkrooms, like Calum Angus just being one of them. But then there's there are more, and it's one of those things where if you want to build one, you'll find a way, and a wee cupboard will do you. It's like.
and you recently launched the analog directory as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Which is an amazing resource and an amazing undertaking.
Well, I hope it to be. I definitely hope it's one of those things, because there's definitely there's more analog artists out there who needs it. Actually, Calum Angus, you need to sign up to it.
So maybe this, because we love shameless plugs, maybe you could just tell the audience at home, if they're not familiar with it, what the analog directory is.
So the analog directory I started up over lockdown. That it wasn't even on reaction to lockdown. It was something I thought of for a wee while, but I think it was lockdown that took kicking it into space. But an online resource where you can access and look at the work of people working throughout, artists working throughout Scotland who work in analog photography, and links to their work, and if there's any other resources like Street Level, like Stills, where you can access darkrooms, and just generally have a bit of a database for analog resources. And it's just the beginning. I really hope it's going to build into something that can be a genuine help and place to access that kind of information.
Fantastic.
And if you want to, if people want to like connect over it, or if you're looking for a collaborator or whatever, like it's a total way to find people on it. And there's a Facebook page attached to it where you can link with those people. So if anyone wants to sign up, totally Calum Angus.
How rubbish I am with social media. I work as a media producer. I run 2 media companies, and sometimes social media just kind of passes me by.
But yeah, I'm just a little bit conscious of time. So I'll give one last shameless plug for the exhibition, and that's Lewis Elegies. It's on at the Beacon Art Centre in Greenock, Fridays and Saturdays only until the 9th of October. The Everything Flows programme continues, still lots of exhibitions and things to see, a few things finishing this weekend. So do check out our website for that, and we'll be coming, touch wood, with slightly better internet connection for our next couple of artist talks. I can only apologise once more.
Who knew it'd be the Glasgow internet that was going to be?
I know.
No, it's fine.
But yeah, thank you so much for your patience and your understanding with that, and thank you to the audience at home as well. It's been a real privilege to have this conversation with you, and I really can't highly recommend enough, if you can get out to see the exhibition, please do so. And I believe that Malcolm shared the link to the virtual, the 3D tour. So if you've got a VR headset, you can actually walk through it in cyberspace. So just once more, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks again for wonderful presentations, and we'll see everyone soon. Take care.
Thanks for asking us.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Bye.